notification came through at 6:12 on a Tuesday morning and I almost dismissed it as spam. I was sitting cross-legged on my bed in a Courtyard Inn outside of Columbus, Ohio, laptop balanced on my knees, reviewing a stack of vendor invoices for a mid-size logistics company that had hired me to find out why their accounts payable numbers hadn't matched their physical inventory for 3 consecutive quarters. My coffee was going cold on the nightstand. I had a site walkthrough in 40 minutes. My phone buzzed face up on the pillow beside me and I glanced at it the way you glance at things when your brain is already somewhere else. The notification was a wire transfer alert. My savings account. Outgoing. $47,000. I put the laptop down very carefully on the mattress beside me. I picked up the phone and opened the alert and read it twice. The transfer had been initiated at 6:09 that morning. The destination account was one I did not recognize. I sat there for a moment with the phone in both hands and the kind of stillness that comes not from calm but from your nervous system trying to decide what to do first. Then I called my bank. My name is Vivienne Cho. I'm 31 years old and I work as a forensic auditor, which means companies and sometimes law firms pay me to follow money through systems where someone has tried very hard to make it disappear. I am good at this work. I am good at it because I have a specific kind of patience that most people find exhausting. The kind where I will read the same document 4 times looking for the thing that doesn't fit. And I will not stop when I get tired. I will stop when I find it. I have been doing this work since I was 26 and in that time I have helped recover more than $9 million in misappropriated funds across 11 different client engagements. I say this not to impress you, but because it matters to what comes next. It matters because the person who tried to take from me knew exactly what I did for a living and chose to try anyway. That person was my older brother. Let me go back to the beginning so you understand how we got to a Tuesday morning in Ohio with $47,000 leaving my account without my permission. Our parents immigrated from South Korea in the early 90s. My father worked in restaurant management. My mother did alterations and tailoring out of our apartment until she had enough clients to rent a small shop space. They were not wealthy people, but they were methodical and they saved, and they made sure my brother and I understood the value of that. My brother is 7 years older than me. Growing up, he was the one who was supposed to be the success story. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, the kind that works in rooms, that makes people lean forward when he talks. He had ideas. He always had ideas. A sports bar franchise, then an app that would connect local farmers with restaurant buyers, then a premium car detailing service targeting corporate clients. Each one arrived with the same energy, the same borrowed spreadsheets and printed pitch decks, the same request for my parents to believe in him a little longer. I watched all of this from the outside and tried to name what bothered me about it. It wasn't that he failed. Failure is ordinary. It was the way the failures never seemed to land on him. Someone else always held the weight of them. Our parents, mostly. And then, eventually, me. I had put myself through college on a combination of scholarships and weekend waitressing. I graduated with a degree in accounting, passed my CPA exam on the first attempt, spent 3 years at a regional firm before going independent at 26. No one helped me do that. I want to be clear about that, not from bitterness, but because it's accurate. My father came to my college graduation and took about 40 photographs and cried quietly in the parking lot afterward. My mother called it expected. My brother didn't come. He had a pitch meeting that day. I noted it and said nothing. When my father had his stroke 18 months before Columbus, my brother called me from wherever he was living at the time, some furnished rental in Nashville, and said he thought he should move back to help with things. I said that sounded like a good idea. I should have asked more questions. I should have asked what help would look like specifically and who would be doing it, and whether there was anything he needed from me in order to make that work. Instead, I said it sounded like a good idea, and I believed him. He moved into my apartment in Charlotte 3 weeks later. He said it was temporary. He said he needed a few months to stabilize while he helped coordinate my father's care from a closer distance. My father was in a rehabilitation facility 40 minutes away. My brother visited him on Sundays. I visited on Sundays and Wednesdays and sometimes Thursday evenings after client calls. My brother handled some of the paperwork for the facility, which I was grateful for because I was traveling 2 to 3 weeks out of most months, and the paperwork was genuinely complicated. What I did not understand until much later was that he had handled some of that paperwork in ways that involved my name. The first sign came about 4 months in. I came home from a 9-day engagement in Phoenix and found a letter from a credit union I had never opened an account with sitting opened on the kitchen counter. Not set aside for me to open. Already opened and refolded, slightly crooked, the way you refold something when you're trying to make it look like you didn't read it. I asked him about it. He said it must have been delivered to the wrong address. He said this very easily, the way he said most things, with a slight forward lean and eye contact that felt like attention but was actually performance. I said okay. I put the letter in a drawer. I noted it. 2 weeks after that, I noticed my filing cabinet had been moved. Not by much. 3 or 4 inches from its usual position against the wall. I hadn't moved it. He said he was vacuuming. I noted it. The moment that made everything click into place happened on a Thursday in March. I had come home a day early from a client site because a meeting had been rescheduled, and I walked in to find him at my desk with my external hard drive plugged into his laptop. Not my laptop. His laptop. He heard the door and he closed the screen quickly and said he was having trouble with his own storage and needed to transfer some files and hoped I didn't mind. He said this before I had said anything. She volunteered it. People who aren't doing anything wrong don't volunteer explanations before they're asked for them. This is something I know from 11 engagements of watching people explain things no one asked them to explain. I said, of course, no problem. And I went to make tea, and I stood in the kitchen for about 3 minutes looking out the window at the parking lot. Then I called my attorney. Her name is Renata Park. She is 44 years old, and she practices civil and financial litigation in Charlotte, and she has a particular quality I've found in very few people, which is that she listens to everything before she forms a conclusion. I told her what I'd seen. All of it. The letter, the filing cabinet, the hard drive. When I finished, she said, "What does he have access to?" I thought about it honestly. "Probably more than he should," I said. She said, "Then we need to start right now, not tomorrow." What followed was 4 months of quiet work. Renata brought in a forensic accountant named David Yoon to review my records and flag any unusual activity. Within 10 days, he had identified 3 instances of small unauthorized transfers from a household expense account my brother had limited visibility into, amounts modest enough to look like rounding errors if you weren't looking for them specifically. He had also found a credit application submitted in my name to a lending platform I had never heard of. It had been denied, which was why I hadn't received any loan proceeds. It had not been denied quickly enough to prevent the inquiry from touching my credit. I changed every password I owned. I revoked my brother's emergency contact status at the rehabilitation facility and replaced it with Renata's office number. I moved the external hard drive to a safety deposit box. I opened a new primary savings account at a different institution entirely and transferred the bulk of my money there, leaving a monitored balance in the old account, enough to look like nothing had changed. Structured with a wire alert threshold so low that any transfer attempt would notify both me and Renata's office simultaneously. Then I set up a camera in the common area of the apartment. I told myself this was a precaution. I told myself I still wasn't certain. I want to be honest about something. Even knowing what I knew, there were nights when I sat in my car in the parking garage before going upstairs and I thought about the Sunday visits to my father's facility. The way my brother would sit on the edge of the chair and try to explain cricket to my father, even though my father had never cared about cricket, and they both laugh about it. There's a specific kind of grief that comes with betrayal by someone you've also genuinely loved. I don't think that grief means the betrayal didn't happen. I just think you should know it was there. Because anyone who tells you this kind of thing is clean and uncomplicated is leaving something out. I was scheduled for an engagement in Columbus starting on a Monday. I told my brother 10 days before I left. I watched his face very carefully when I told him. There was a stillness there, just for a moment. The particular stillness of someone adjusting a calculation. He asked how long I'd be gone. I said probably 2 weeks. He nodded and said he'd keep an eye on the place. I left on Monday morning. By Tuesday at 6:09 a.m., Someone had initiated a $47,000 wire transfer from the account he believed was my primary savings account. When I called the bank that morning, they flagged the transaction within 11 minutes. The transfer went into a review hold. The funds did not move. Renata received the simultaneous alert and had already drafted the emergency notice to the fraud division by the time I called her. I love her for this. I have told her so. I sat in that hotel room for 20 more minutes. I finished the cold coffee. I repacked my laptop bag. I went downstairs and drove to the client site and spent 6 hours reviewing payroll reconciliation records because I am a professional and the work doesn't stop because your life is on fire in a separate location. On the drive back to the hotel, I called David and asked him to compile everything into a formal documentation package. He said it would be ready within 48 hours. I said, "Thank you." When I got back to my room, I pulled up the camera feed from the apartment. He had spent 4 hours going through my filing cabinet. He'd been methodical about it. I'll give him that. He wore gloves, which meant he'd thought about this, which meant he'd planned it. He'd photographed documents with his phone. He'd removed 2 folders and replaced them with what looked like blank paper refolded to the same thickness. He had also, at some point in the afternoon, sat down on my couch and eaten cereal from a bowl and watched television for 40 minutes, which for some reason was the part that stayed with me most. The absolute domesticity of it. The bowl in the sink afterward. I called Renata again. She said she was ready. I said okay. She said, "Do you want to come home?" I said, "Not yet." I said, "Finish your trip, handle your client, let us handle this end." I said okay again and meant it. The documentation package David produced was 41 pages. It included the original unauthorized transfers, the fraudulent credit application, screen captures of the camera footage with timestamps, and a supplementary section on the credit union letter that David had tracked, through public records, to an account opened in my name with a forged signature on the application. My brother had been trying to establish a parallel credit profile using my identity. The wire transfer attempt was not the beginning of the plan, it was closer to the end of it. He had been building this for at least 8 months. Renata filed with the Charlotte PD Financial Crimes Unit and simultaneously flagged the identity theft component with the relevant federal agencies because the credit application had crossed state lines. A detective named Lorraine Hess was assigned. She called me on a Thursday evening while I was in a chain restaurant outside of Columbus eating a bowl of pasta and reading a depositions transcript. She had already reviewed the package. She said, "You've made this very easy to follow." I said, "I do this professionally." She said, "I know. I looked you up." She almost sounded amused. I was not quite at the point where I could be amused, but I appreciated the effort. I flew home on a Friday evening. My brother was at the apartment. He did not know I was coming back early. I unlocked the door and he was on the couch. He looked up and there was a sequence of expressions across his face that I have thought about many times since then. Surprise. Then something calculating, then something that was trying very hard to be normal. He said, "Hey, you're back." I said, "Yes." He said, "How was Columbus?" I said, "Fine." I put my bag down and went to the kitchen and filled a glass of water and stood there drinking it. He came to the kitchen doorway and leaned against the frame and said something about my father's upcoming therapy evaluation and how he'd already called the facility to confirm the time. I said, "I know about the credit application." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "What credit application?" I said, "The one in my name that was filed 8 months ago using a forged signature and routing it through the credit union you opened also in my name." He said, "That's a serious accusation." I said, "It's a documented fact." He said, "You don't have proof." I said, "I have 41 pages of it." He left that night. He didn't take much. I think he believed there was still a version of this where things could be negotiated. I think he thought I was his sister first and a forensic auditor second. He had never understood that I was both at the same time. The legal process took 7 months. It is not dramatic, the legal process. It is phone calls and document requests and scheduled meetings and a lot of waiting in lobbies. Detective Hess was thorough and patient. The identity theft charges moved through the federal channel. The civil component, which Renata handled, resulted in a structured restitution agreement that required him to repay the fraudulent credit inquiry damages and a financial penalty for the attempted wire transfer. His attorney tried to frame it as a misunderstanding. Renata's response to this, delivered in a conference room in a very even voice, was 23 minutes long and included exhibit numbers. I sat next to her and did not say anything because there was nothing I needed to add. My father does not know the full picture. He knows there was a disagreement. He knows my brother is not living with me anymore. He asked me about it once during a Wednesday visit, sitting in the rehab center's small garden with a cup of tea going cold in his hands, the same way mine always does. I told him that sometimes people make choices you can't fix for them. He looked at me for a long moment and then he nodded and said he was proud of how I'd handled things, even though I hadn't told him how I'd handled things. I think he understood more than he said. He usually does. I refurnished the second bedroom. I bought a standing desk and a proper monitor setup and moved my client files and my case archive in there. It used to be where my brother slept. Now it's where I work when I'm not traveling. I did my taxes in that room in February for the first time in my life without feeling like someone was watching me through a wall. I want to tell you the part that stays with me most. Not the wire transfer or the 41 pages or the conference room or any of it. The part that stays with me is a smaller thing. About 3 weeks after he left, I was cleaning out the kitchen and I found a handwritten note tucked behind the toaster. It was in his handwriting, a phone number and 2 words beside it that I think were some kind of shorthand for the destination account. Something that made sense to him as a system. He had been moving through my life with a plan and a shorthand and a phone number behind my toaster, and I had lived beside it for months without knowing it was there. I put it in the evidence folder. I labeled it. I sent a photo to Renata and to David. Then I moved the toaster 6 inches to the left because I wanted to, and because the space where it had been was bothering me, and because some things you change just because you can. My brother called once after the settlement finalized. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that started with, "I'm not asking you to forgive me," and then asked me to call him back. I haven't. I don't know if I will. Forgiveness and contact are 2 separate things, and I have spent enough of my life letting other people blur the line between them. I'll tell you what I've learned from this that I didn't already know professionally, because professionally I knew most of it. What I didn't know personally was how long you can look at something and call it probably nothing when the honest word for it is warning. I am trained to read documents the way other people read novels, looking for the thing that breaks the pattern. And I still spent months translating my brother's behavior into explanations that let me keep loving him without complication. That translation work costs something. I want to be honest about what it costs. The day I stopped translating was the Thursday I came home and found him with my hard drive. I sat in the kitchen with my tea, and I looked out the window, and for the first time, I let myself think the honest thought, not the kind version of it, not the maybe he just version of it, the honest thought. And then I called Renata. That's the part I'll leave you with. Not the legal outcome or the recovery percentage or the restitution agreement filed with the case record. The moment in the kitchen with the tea. The decision to think the honest thought and then act on it instead of building one more explanation for someone who is not building anything for me. If there is someone in your life who has been counting on you to keep building those explanations, I want you to think about what that cost you last year, and the year before that, and whether you want to keep paying it. I've thought a lot about the note behind the toaster, not what it meant legally. David and Renata handled that part. I mean what it meant about the years before it. Someone I grew up with, someone who sat across from me at my parents' dinner table, had been moving through my life with a shorthand system and a burner contact number tucked behind my kitchen appliances, and I had lived 3 feet away from it without knowing. That's the part nobody talks about when they tell stories like this one. They talk about the resolution, the documentation, the moment the account gets frozen and the other person panics. And yes, that happened. My brother called twice that Tuesday morning from a number I didn't recognize, which told me he was already trying to create distance between himself and what he'd done. He knew. He knew before he even heard my voice. But the part that changed me wasn't the 41 pages or the federal filing or the conference room where Renata laid out 23 minutes of exhibits without raising her voice once. The part that changed me was the Thursday I came home early and stood in my kitchen with a cup of tea and finally let myself think the honest thought, not the charitable version, not the maybe, he just version, the actual thought. The one I'd been rerouting around for months because thinking it clearly meant I'd have to act on it, and acting on it meant accepting that the situation was what it was, and not what I'd preferred it to be. There's a version of intelligence that's very good at building explanations. I have that kind of intelligence. It's useful in my work. It is not always useful in my life. For months I used it to construct reasons why open mail was humidity and a moved filing cabinet was vacuuming and a hard drive plugged into the wrong laptop was a storage problem. Every explanation was technically possible. None of them were true. And I think somewhere underneath all of it I knew that, and I kept building anyway, because the alternative required a kind of courage I wasn't sure I had yet. What I've come to understand is that protecting yourself is not a cold act. People frame it that way, especially when the person doing the harm is family. You're calculating, you're unforgiving, you're treating a relationship like a transaction. But here's what I actually think. The cold act was his. He made a choice to treat my trust as a resource he could extract from. Every month I spent translating his behavior into something survivable. I was absorbing the cost of that choice so he wouldn't have to. That's not love. That's a subsidy. And I had been paying it for a long time before I understood what it was. My father still doesn't know the full picture. He knows there was a falling out. He looked at me in that rehab center garden and said he was proud of how I'd handled things, and I think he meant it as both a statement and a question. I didn't answer the question directly. I just held his hand for a while and watched the light change across the courtyard, and I thought about what it means to love someone and still require them to face what they've done. Those two things can exist at the same time. I've had to learn that they can. The room where my brother used to sleep is my office now. I did my taxes in it last February. I've run 3 new client engagements out of it this year. I moved the toaster 6 inches because I wanted the counter to be mine again in a way that was small and completely mine. That's the ending I'll offer you, not triumphant, not bitter. Just a Tuesday morning where I sat in a room that used to hold someone else's deception, and I opened my laptop and I worked. That's what getting your life back actually looks like most of the time. Quiet. Ordinary. Entirely yours.